Okie doke. Let me just make sure I can do that.
All right, so my name is Laura Caldie, and I run sales and marketing here at Applied Frameworks. I'm also the webinar host for today, so that's my main job right now, is to let you all know that we'll be recording the webinar and sharing out the link to the recording, along with some, if whatever questions get asked during this, if we feel we could do a better job or a deeper dive into any particular question, that'll also be part of the email that we'll send out to everyone who registered. So I think one of the things to note in terms of logistics for the webinar is, as you have questions, it would be great if you could put them in the Q&A button. And when I can, or when it makes sense, I'll interject them over the course of the webinar, and whatever we can't get to that way, we have time at the end to talk about questions. So any question you have in Q&A will be helpful to us. Even if we don't get to it, we will get to it in the follow-up email. So no question is a waste of time.
Absolutely.
The other thing I'll point out here is, if you need to reach me, my email address is on there, laura@appliedframeworks.com. And I'm sure you all know this, we say it a lot, but our focus is helping organizations create sustainable, profitable software-enabled solutions. And when you're thinking about the application or the introduction of software, for some companies, their hardware, software is new. Right. For other companies, software is what they're delivering, but figuring out how to create a business model that's both sustainable and profitable requires a lot of things, right? Often agility is part of it. Portfolio management is part of it, right? So these are areas that we focus on. In that product management space, Carlton is our head of product. So this is, certainly a area of extreme interest for him, but this webinar really is about, like, hey, well, how do we think about sustainable profitability when we're talking about a software enabled solution? So if you want to flip forward, Carlton. So for me, my personal interest in kind of how you create a profitable software enabled solution really is around customer understanding. And my background, other than being in sales, is I've participated in many kind of customer research, customer understanding pieces. And when we're thinking about this system that is profitable software, we talk about it as profit streams. Customer is just one segment in here that I happen to be kind of personally interested in, but it's a system and there's a lot to this. And this is why I'm really excited that Carlton is leading this conversation, because he's really going to be talking about licensing, which is super important to the system itself, but not necessarily my personal strength. So I'm really glad that Carlton is leading this.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll pass it over to you, Carlton, and you can say a few words about yourself.
Yeah, I'm the SVP of product here at Applied Frameworks. My responsibilities are around managing our portfolio of products, which includes, lots of different things that we offer here. So our consulting services, our live instructor-led training, and our online academy. So I'm the co-creator of the Applied Frameworks Online Academy with our CEO, Jason Tanner. And a lot of my focus recently has been working on how do we improve and expand the impact of our product management accelerators. In fact, I'm getting ready just this week for a trip to India to do some work with the Product Management Academy for one of our clients in India. So I'm really looking forward to that. I live in Portugal. So anything else?
No, actually, well, if you put the slide forward one more.
Let's go ahead.
Dog shows on there too, which of course I love your dog. So
my dog.
Yeah. Oh, actually, that's not true. One more. So
okay.
One thing I did want to mention here, and we'll send this out as well, is we have a lot of webinars that are recorded now around profit streams. And so this is one dimension, but for those who are interested, especially after this, if you go to our webinar page, you'll see recordings for many others that I think are also really interesting.
Yep. This is me, my background here, just SVP of product Scrum trainer. And Laura wanted to see the dog. That's my dog. He's Boston Terrier. He's 1 year old this week. So, okay. Well, thank you very much, Laura, for the introduction and helping people kind of orient themselves to what else we've talked about with respect to profit streams. Today, we're talking about software licenses. And when I mention the term software license, what image comes to mind, right? So kind of think about that. Is it like we have here the image on the left, a seemingly incomprehensible block of text written in perhaps a foreign language? Or is it kind of like the image that we might have here on the right, peering into a mysterious abyss that perhaps has no end. Our goal today is to help clear up some of the confusion you might be experiencing so that the next time you read your software license agreements, you feel confident you understand what you're reading. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the agenda that we have. Agenda, straightforward. Introductions, we've already done that. What we're going to be talking about next was why do you care about this topic and what do you need to know? So pretty straightforward agenda. And what I'm going to do today is to synthesize multiple concepts from different webinars. So, but don't worry if you missed out on different webinars, you won't miss it much. But I'm going to synthesize some multiple concepts to show you how design choices made by product managers and product owners impact multiple elements of a software-enabled solutions business model. So we're going to do some synthesis today and show how all this stuff is interconnected. And as Luke and Jason like to say, the authors of our Profit Streams book, it's a system, right? So let's think about why do we care? And I want to start on this idea here. A long time ago, I was a geophysicist, and here are some of the tools that I used while out in the field, right? Rock hammer. So as a geophysicist, you want to expose a fresh surface of rock outcrop so that you can see the minerals, and you can see what's there, get under the dirt. Next, we have Brunton compass. So the Brunton compass is used to measure what's called the strike and the dip of faults and rock layers or rock formations found in the field. This is just data that you collect, very important to help you understand what's going on in the subsurface. Here is a digital camera enabled with GPS, and this is used to record any outcrops or unusual formations with an image. So a lot of pictures geologists or geophysicists take are of like folds and rocks, and they usually put like a coin in the picture for scale. And then finally, last thing you need are hiking boots, because if you're going to spend a lot of time on your feet, you need some good shoes. All right. And what I want to ask all of you, right, because we are going to connect this in a moment to software licenses. One of these tools is different from the others. And I'm going to want you to think about which one that is. And you can share with us in a poll what you think it is. So let me launch the poll. So Laura, while we wait for people to answer this poll, what do you think? Which of these tools is different from the others?
Oh, I have an unfair advantage because I know. But you know, given the fact that I'm you know, about to need a better pair of winter boots myself, like I'm focused on your boots there. I'm based in Chicago and it's snowing and wet and cold, and my shoes aren't going to cut it today. So
I have to say the Brunton compass, I did a move recently and I found my Brunton compass. I had to adjust it for the declination because compasses need to be adjusted where you are in a position of the earth, because north kind of moves around.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Well,
so
I wouldn't even know how to calibrate that. I would not know how to use it.
Well, you have to look at a table. So okay. So feels like we've got 16 out of 19 people. Oh, 18. I'm going to end the poll there and let's see what came up. And we'll share the results. All right. And the results are, just for everyone here, rock hammer, 22%, Brunton compass, 11%, digital camera, 44%, and hiking boots, 22%. Okay. And so for those of you that said it was the Pentex GPS enabled digital camera, you are correct, right? That one is different from all the others, but how is the digital camera different? What makes it unique, right? How is this one different from the others? And tell us in chat, right? What do you think, Laura? What makes the Pentex GPS enabled digital camera different from the other ones?
Well, again, I know the answer, but one of the things I'm thinking is that output is digital and it can live in its output can then live in many places. So I could have what it produces live on my computer. It could be in the cloud. Like there's flexibility on the output of what it creates.
All right, so we're seeing some ideas. Technology, it's technology. It has GPS, creates an archive. Software enables the camera functionality, input, output. So for the folks and people that said technology, that's true. But remember, the Brunton compass is a piece of technology. It's a magnet. It's technology. It's analog technology, right? And this here, I think people would say, I think someone mentioned software, right? What makes the digital camera unique is the software, right? It is the one field tool here that relies on software. And here is why I'm talking about this software-enabled camera in a webinar about software licenses, right? Let me just get this to work. Software is not a physical thing, it's intellectual property, right? And this is really, really important when we talk about software licenses because software is not a physical thing, right? It's intellectual property. It means that we have to license the software to the customer. It's not sold. And unlike a physical good, like perhaps this candle or my wallet or the Brunton compass, where the customer can transfer ownership rights. I can give that Brunton compass to someone else, or I can give my rock hammer to a geology student. A software license restricts how and what ownership rights may be transferred, if any at all, right? Now, some of you might be thinking at this point, wait a minute, digital camera is a physical thing I can buy. So I'm not quite following your logic here, right? Because this is a digital camera too, right? Physical. If you attended our November webinar on value exchange, you will recall that the pattern of value exchange described with my digital camera example is called hardware. If you did not attend that webinar, don't worry about it. A value exchange model is simply a pattern that describes when the customer gives a provider money, what do they expect in return? In this case, right, that would be a Pentex GPS-enabled digital camera, right? And so I give the provider, let's say it's Amazon.com, money. They give me back a Pentex GPS-enabled digital camera. But without the software, the digital camera is an inert piece of junk. And that's why we call that value exchange model hardware. The value people associate with the hardware, right, the digital camera, comes with free software already installed on the device, right? And so what software exists on a digital camera? Well, there's algorithms to digitize and store them in memory. There's software to manage and display digital photos on the camera on the little LED screen. There's software to adjust the various settings of an image, such as color saturation, tint, warmth, crispness, etc., after the photo's been taken. And most importantly, to the geophysicist in the field, there's software for the GPS, the precise latitude and longitude and elevation of a location. So when I'm out there taking pictures of these rock formations or where these faults are, right, I know where that was on the map. I don't have to go figure it out old school, like with the Brunton compass and try to triangulate my position, which I did in graduate school, right? And the use of that software, all that software that's on the Pentex digital camera is governed by license agreements. In fact, the Pentex digital camera shows that there are actually two types of license agreements that we need as product owners and product managers to pay attention to, right? So if you're buying the digital camera, right, your use of the digital camera is governed by a customer license, the rights and restrictions imposed upon you by Pentex, right? On the other hand, if we're Pentex and we wish to embed, for instance, the GPS software into our digital camera, the use of that software is governed by what's called a solution license, the rights and restrictions imposed on us by our suppliers. Okay, so this digital camera example is really good because it talks about when you buy the digital camera and you open it up as a piece of hardware, there are a number of license restrictions that you have related to the software, right? You can't actually go and modify the software on that digital camera. You're not allowed to do that. Now, I can give the digital camera to somebody else, right? That's fine, they can use it. but they can't go and modify that software either. Now, Pentex also makes agreements with me as the user of the camera of what sort of things that they will provide me. And as you know, sometimes with digital cameras, sometimes support for the software for, downloading the images, they don't support it after a certain amount of time. So after 5-10 years, like I have some really old digital cameras, the software that runs the digital camera, like on my computer, it's defunct. So why does a product manager need to understand the relationship between customer and solution licenses, especially as it relates to solution licenses? Because every software-enabled solution is a mixture of new code and systems integrations with other components. And in the case of the Pentex digital camera, how they used and paid for the various components of like the GPS, the image algorithms, digitize the images, all of that was defined by a solution license, right? They had to go to the people who wrote the software for those two examples and get permission to use their software on their physical device. And they had to pay for those rights, and they had to negotiate what rights they could have. And if you think about the Applied Frameworks profit stream canvas, this is why licensing is 2 blocks in the profit stream canvas. The profit stream canvas has 10, so 20% of the profit stream canvas is all about licensing. Customer licenses, right? Those relationships you impose upon your customers, and solution licenses, the relationships that our suppliers impose upon us. And in the Pentex example, we saw the outlines of how the value exchange model, hardware, drives design choices made in the solution and customer licenses. So let's look at another example, which will show how design choices in our solution, like how we architect the system, propagates into pricing, solution licensing, and customer licensing. And I just want to emphasize again, with software-enabled solutions and profit streams, this is all an interconnected system. You can't think about these things in isolation. So in the Applied Frameworks Online Academy, we license multiple solutions to deliver our advanced Scrum and product management accelerators products, right? The 3 solutions we in-license, right, are our learning management system, our LMS. We get that from a company called Cypher Learning. Our e-commerce platform, WooCommerce, pretty standard internet. And then our credit card processor, Stripe. So let's look at in detail, or at some of the restrictions Stripe imposes on us, because we don't want to build a credit card processing system. We don't want to build an e-commerce platform. We don't want to build an LMS. So, right, our competency is continuing education for product management, advanced Scrum practitioners. So we in-license these technologies to deliver our solution. Perfectly legitimate approach, but because we in-license Stripe to do our credit card processing, they put certain restrictions on us, how we use our technology. So Stripe charges a transaction fee for each sale we make, right? That's their value exchange model. It's called transaction. And this has an impact on our profit. So for instance, one of our products that we offer in the advanced Scrum training is called Advanced Certified Scrum Master Express. Our current price level is $795, right? And if you look out, according to the transaction fee from Stripe, you can see what our payout is and how much we have to pay Stripe to use their solution on every transaction. But if you look at the price level, right, it is sufficiently high so that this payment to Stripe is negligible when compared to the overall profitability of this product itself. Okay. Stripe also has some rules around refunds, which impact the profitability, right? So let's take a look at what our refunds were at our online academy last year, right? So this is for everything that we sold on the online academy. We had 13 out of 29 transactions, 239 transactions were refunds. It's about 6%, which is a little bit below the industry average. So I'm not too concerned about this annual loss. In the big scheme of things, this is, acceptable. However, Stripe's rules about no refunds after 6 months does have a material impact on our customer license. So because Stripe will not refund us after 6 months, right? They won't send the money back to someone's credit card. That means on our end, we would have to write a check, right, to pay someone back their money. And financially, we're not going to do that, right? That's actually a much bigger loss than 379. So as a result of Stripe's restriction, that impacts the customer license, and our customer's license is absolutely no refunds after 6 months. Now, we give people all sorts of refunds. If you don't, in the first 7 days, if you don't like it, we give a full refund. After that, it's a pro rata refund based upon how much you consume. But after 6 months, there's absolutely no refunds because we can't get that money back from Stripe. And I just want to emphasize here, right, is the second example, much like the Pentex example, illustrates why understanding software licenses are so important for product managers and product owners, right? All of these things are interconnected. And while things you don't think would have an impact, really do. I'll take a quick pause because I feel like I've been monologuing. How's it going, Laura?
Suppose I should unmute. So far,
Yeah.
so good.
Okay.
At this point, if anyone has any questions or you just want to make sure we're going to talk about something, or maybe you even have a scenario you want to pose, please feel free, stick it in the Q&A, and we can certainly do some kind of scenario discussions as well. Yeah, no, I think keep going. And at this point, I don't have anything to interject.
Okay. Yeah. So, all right. So where does a product manager start? Right. Well, here's some advice we give our clients. Number one piece of advice we give to our clients: read the contract. And software license agreements are contracts. And if you do not read the contract, you do not know what you're signing up for. So I urge you, take the time to understand the terms contained in any solution license for the components that you use in your software-enabled solution, and make sure it's clear in your mind what commitments you're making to your customers in your customer licenses, because that is a contract of a relationship that you're establishing with your customers. So if you say it in the license agreement, you have to deliver on it. And because software licenses are contracts, they are often detailed, they use specialized language, and let's face it, they're a bit dry to read. I was just reading one in preparation for this webinar. It's tough, right? And if you don't understand something in a contract, do not guess. Consult with your corporate counsel. Product managers are not lawyers, so do not pretend to one. And I just want to emphasize this point, right? If you don't understand what's there, go talk to a lawyer. That's their job, to give you advice and to know this stuff, right? Okay, so talk to a lawyer if you have any doubts. There are lots of sections to these contracts, right? And in the spirit of time, I'm only going to focus on these 6 areas, okay? And to help make this conversation more real and less theoretical, right, I'm going to share with you excerpts from a customer license agreement from a company that I discovered called Spanning. Spanning is a small software company based out of Austin, Texas, about 25 people. And they're a provider of a software-enabled solution that stores and protects data generated by SaaS solutions. So for instance, suppose you want to make your own copy of any sort of proprietary data that you've stored in a Google Workspace or in Salesforce. Spanning solution allows you to make a backup of that data that you have stored in the cloud. So let's take a look at the first sections that we identified: definitions and usage. All right. So this section offers a precise legal definition and description of all the important terms or items referenced in your license agreement, right? We recommend that you pay close attention to what is listed in these sections, right? Because these definitions will often include specific version numbers, supported operating systems, hardware considerations, and so forth. And if it's not listed here, you don't get access to it. For instance, if you're expecting upgrades and support and they're not covered in these sections, you will have to create another contract to pay your supplier to provide you with the needed or required technology. So if support isn't covered in definitions and usage, guess what? You're not getting it. So let's take a look at an example from spanning. So what you hear are some examples of definitions. Little bit dry, right, Laura? And other things that they define in their license agreement, this section of definitions are what's confidential data, what do they mean by documentation, SOW or statement of work, they define that, what a user is, an order form, and other terms. Right? Again, this is a legal contract, so they have to define all these things in here. Next, take a moment here to see what is described as usage. And what you're going to see is I'm going to highlight in red the key parts of these contract agreements, just because I wanted to highlight the key ones. So this is the usage. Non-sub-licensable, right? Means you can't take their solution and put it into another solution that you create. Non-exclusive, which means other people can use it. Revocable, which means they can take away rights. Non-transferable right to use the software. So you can't transfer to a different company the ability to use their software, okay? It is limited to authorized users, which is the reason why they define what a user is. You shall not exceed the number of purchased seats, so seats are also defined. And it shall be used for the licensee's internal business purposes only, right? And this is kind of emphasizing like, hey, you can't, based on this contract, you can't go out and create a cloud backup service. I can't, like Laura, you and I can't get together and be like, hey, we think people would love to use a cloud backup service. Let's go take Spanning's tool and use it and sell it. Not allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, again, the thing I want to kind of emphasize also here when you look at usage, later in the agreement, in the section on proprietary rights, which I did not highlight, the contract is very clear that this software is licensed, not sold. Remember what I said, software is intellectual property, therefore it's licensed, not sold. And that any services that Spanning might provide would be on a subscription basis, that they are not sold. So they are being super, super clear that you are only licensing this. Okay, definition or term. Quite simply, this is just when the contract begins and ends, but it gets a little bit more complicated than that because we start talking about little different types of dates, right? And you'll notice here I say, hey, pay close attention to these dates. There's lots of dates. You may not be able to read that. Effective date, expiration date, payment, audit periods, and termination notice. So the effective date is when the date the contract begins. Expiration date when the contract ends. Payment is when you need to pay the supplier for the use of the technology. Next, audit periods. If you have audit periods in your contract, which this one actually does, and it highlighted here, that means that the supplier can come on site and review your use of the technology. And if you are using the technology in a way that's not defined, they can revoke your right to use the technology. Remember, it's revocable, or they can charge you more. And then termination notice is how much time you need to give to begin to end the relationship. Okay, so let's take a look at what some examples from Spanning. Okay, so here's what we're talking about is they're talking about term is defined as periods, or actually going in and this. I like this example of the Spanning license agreement because it's not super clean. There's a little bit of messiness. They have a definition embedded in a section. Talks about the effective date, and notice that they said that there's not a termination date. They will define one for you. All right, 3-year anniversary of the effective date. Okay, that's fine. Next, the section on specific use and sublicenses. So there are 3 types of use. Typically, there's development, so you can get a license to use something in a development environment. There is another use, which is quality assurance or verification. So basically, hey, I want to assess the technology before using it, right? And then there's finally, which is like a commercial use. Like, hey, you can use this in commercial products. One of the things I want to make super clear is you have to confirm how you use the technology, right? And so this picture, I showed this recently to some colleagues. They really liked it. And the idea here is that unless your license agreement says that you can use the cat in the box, right? You can, for instance, you have this cool component and it's represented by the cat. Let's get it from a supplier. If you don't have the right to sublicense that component, you cannot take that component that you get in supplier and put it into another solution, right? You can only put it into your solution. And if you want the ability for your product to exist in another solution, right, you need to ask for permission from your supplier. You need to ask for permission from your supplier to use that cat in a different box, right? And this, let's take a look at what Spanning says about sublicensing. Okay, so you get 1 copy for backup or test purposes, right? You can only deploy or possess the number of copies that are expressly specified on the order form. And I think we saw earlier, right, they talked a lot about non-sublicensable, right? Again, this is a legal agreement, right? And this is how they're describing its use. You could only have a number of copies that are equivalent to what's on the order form, except for 1 copy made for backup or test purposes. All right, and then here we're talking here, non-sublicensable, non-exclusive, revocable, non-transferable, right? So in this case, Spanning is like, you are not allowed to sublicense their technology in any way or form, or you'll be in violation of the agreement. All right, so termination, right? One party may, and so termination talks about this idea that how do we end the relationship, right? And one party may breach the agreement due to performance reasons, right? Maybe I'm bought Spanning and I only bought 10 licenses, I am using 50. Or maybe Spanning is not providing a solution that's performant, and so it sort of maybe has lots of bugs or quality decreases, right? So termination allows one party to breach, but oftentimes there are remedies enumerated in the contract. So just because there's a breach in the contract, there sometimes are like clauses which will say, well, each party has an opportunity to rectify the breach. Sometimes contracts are terminated when there's a substantial change in control, there's a bankruptcy, so maybe Spanning just goes out of business, or they no longer produce the technology. So Spanning says, listen, we're not gonna support this anymore. That's very common with software because certain versions become deprecated. And the thing though, with termination, especially if you're in licensing a solution, right? Replacing an in-licensed technology with a new tech, like say, we want to use a new LMS. That is a big, big undertaking for us at Applied Frameworks. I've already replaced one LMS and went through that process, learning management system. I wouldn't do it again. Or growing your own, like say, we say, we can build our own learning management system. It always takes longer than planned. So even though that there isn't termination clause for remedies, it's not all, sometimes it's better to stick with the technology. So an LMS is called a learning management system. It's a platform in which to engage with learners asynchronously, for people who might be unfamiliar with that term. All right, so they talk about termination for spanning. So let's take a look at the really easy one, section B, the end of a term that's not renewed. Right. So at the end of the contract, they just say, hey, we're not going to renew. That's termination. Right. Or you could say, hey, you know what? 30 days following written notice of any material breach. So you can end the contract, but you have to have written notice. Right. Let's and that's why I want to make a comment here. So it's references sections 2 or 3 by the licensee. So what were some examples? So I looked in the contract here. It says exceeding the number of users specified in the order form. That would be an example of the material breach. Having multiple copies of the software. Using the software outside of internal business purposes. Reverse engineering the product. Right. So you're not allowed to try to reverse engineer spanning solution. So you can't purchase spanning solution with the idea of like, hey, if we buy this, we can kind of uncrack its code, object code. No, you can't do that. Creating a derivative work. So my example, Laura and I, like, hey, we want to create a new business to create a cloud backup solution, and at its core will be spanning solution. No, can't do that. Hacking license keys. And also violating US export laws, right? Most software license agreements, especially with sensitive technology, are governed by federal export laws. All right, so real simple, this section here, how much does it cost? And this is where things can get tricky, right? And the tricky thing is that when you in-license technology from a supplier, they have their own business model, right? Their own value exchange model in which they want to make money. And so you want to make sure that your value exchange model of your software-enabled solution is compatible with the value exchange model of your supplier solution, or that ideally that they're harmonized, or at least they can work together. If there's a they're discontinuous, then you may not be able to leverage that technology in your solution. You may have to build your own solution. Good example that I like to use is thinking about the idea of we want to create a streaming service. Let's say that streaming service is going to be, show movies, a variety of movies, classic movies, but maybe kids movies, right? And we want our customers to pay what's called time-based access, $19.99 a month. Great, okay, that's good. But maybe the library of content that we want to get, right? The coolest science fiction movies or the coolest superhero movies. In order to license that technology, that supplier says, hey, you know what, you need to pay us a royalty, basically a transaction fee, right? If that transaction fee is sufficiently high, right, the cost associated with consuming that content from that library could outweigh the money I collect from my time-based access, the $19.99 per month. So you just have to make sure that the two match up as a product owner or product manager. And here's an example here from spanning. And notice here, right? Software based on software license and service purchase, not actual usage, right? Doesn't matter if you buy 100 licenses, you only use 2, too bad. Non-cancelable, non-refundable, right? So we sign a contract for 100 licenses, and then later we say, oh, no, we don't want to do that, or we want to get a refund of 30%, too bad. And you can't decrease, right? This is the contract. Renewal. This is pretty straightforward. What happens when the contract ends, when the time runs up? Well, is this something that you want? you want to be on the lookout for automatic renewals. So it seems convenient as a consumer, like, oh yeah, as a customer, I have automatic renewals, like LinkedIn does automatic renewals. If I am in licensing technology for my software-enabled solution, and it's core to my the delivery of my value to my customers, core to profitability, sure, automatic renewal is great. Let's see how spanning solves this problem. And I just picked spanning at random. I was trying to find an example of something to download as a PDF. And if you go back to the slide on spanning, there's a little bit.ly tag there. You can download their license agreement, read it on your own. So here, automatic renewal of the term equals the length of the previous term. All right, so if we had a 1-year contract, automatic renewal is 1 year. If we had a 3-year contract, it automatically renews for 3 years. And remember, it's non-cancelable, non-refundable. You can't decrease the number of licenses that you have. It's based on seats, not usage, right? And so let's say we had a big company, we had 200 licenses for spanning, right? Went through some downsizing, some economic problems. We only need 50, but we had an automatic renewal. That means that we would still have to pay for 200 licenses, the automatic renewal. The other thing which is really, really interesting here is they automatically build in a 5% increase on the new term, plus any increase in the consumer price index. And in the United States recently, there's been a lot of inflation. Right now, right, I looked at what this would be. So from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, that is 6.5%. So if you had an automatic renewal with spanning, right, the total is 11.5%. That's a lot that you may not want to be paying on an automatic renewal. So read very carefully around automatic renewals. And then this is other sections: territories, non-compete, deployment restrictions, and marketing requirements. Territory is sometimes related to, you want to read these sections carefully, where you can use the solution or any restrictions you might want to put on the customer on where they use it. Non-compete, right? Are you able to compete in the same space by using it? Marketing requirements, that is more with respect to a classic one is Intel Inside, right? There were a lot of times, people would say, hey, we have the Intel chip, so that's a marketing requirement. These are some things that you think you want, but you probably don't, which is exclusivity. Generally, you don't want to have, you think it might be valuable for exclusivity on a certain solution or component, or access to the source code. The thing with the source code here is, okay, so you get the source code, what are you going to do with it? So sure, it's nice if it's in the contract, but if the supplier goes bankrupt and you have access to the source code, it's not really going to help you, because do your engineers know the programming language? Are they familiar enough with it to get it up to speed? So source code, is a nice thing to put in a contract, but may not really be that relevant. And that brings us to the end. So Laura, what sort of questions we got? No, you're on mute, sorry.
Yeah, I think some of them might have been answered already, but and I know we've lost Saurav, so we can check in a minute, but let's see. So you talked about it, but it's like really being clear on what the duration and term is of a contract is really important from the, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but if you're the creator of the software enabled solution, be very intentional about what the term is that you're granting to your customer for whatever money is exchanged. Has to be really clear. And I think maybe sometimes I can imagine where the term in the contract doesn't actually match how the software behaves in the market, right? So when you're at the end of the term, does the software just stop working?
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Or does it never stop working and you're end of the term and you have to manually go police the systems that you've built? And so you'd mentioned it earlier, but having this systems thinking approach means that
Mhm.
what sounds good and easy in a contract may or may not be good and easy to enforce from a
Mhm.
software architecture and behavior standpoint.
Right. Exactly. Right. Everything's interrelated. So if you're trying to enforce, hey, at the end of the license, they lose access, your developers might be saying, well, what happens to their data? Do
Right,
we
because
delete the
now it's
data?
into compliance,
Right.
right? There
Right.
might
Mhm.
be some kind of compliant requirement that you retain data for a certain amount of time.
Mhm.
Right, so
Right.
your term can end, someone loses access, and your engineers are absolutely right to ask, well, what happens
Mhm.
to the data? And the answer might be
Mhm.
very much tied to what the compliance and regulatory environment looks like that you operate in.
Which is another block in the profit
Funny that
sharing
I put that in
canvas.
there,
Yeah.
but
Right.
yeah.
Or you may be required by compliance to maintain the data, which means you have to put that in your license agreement
Right.
that you lose access, but their data will be maintained for this amount of period.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, when you're talking about like in licensing, right?
Mhm.
Let's say you've incorporated some library or some data
Mhm.
set into your solution that you do
Mhm.
have the rights to resell or
Mhm.
incorporate into your
Mhm.
solution. But perhaps you have a term licensing that needs to be renewed
Mhm.
periodically. And are you remembering that that's the case? Do you have
Mhm.
mechanisms in place to make sure that those renewals are
Mhm.
happening or at least reviewed? I can also imagine
Mhm.
there's a point in time where maybe you're not using them anymore and yet you're still
Mhm.
paying them. Right. So
Well, yeah, that's why sometimes there's these automatic renewals in these license agreements where as a product manager, you need to decide, do I want this or not?
mhm,
And here's the thing with a lot of solution licenses, unless you're super mega, they're as is. You
mhm,
can't negotiate. I can't go to Span and be like, oh, by the way, I want this in the license agreement, right? That's not going to happen. You got to be at the mega scale of like the huge tech companies to get your own license agreement. So it's your responsibility as a product manager to be aware of these risks, like for instance, renewal, and then to work with the engineers and say, hey, do we still need this? Or is it
mm,
still providing us value? And is it still profitable?
yep. Okay, so another one that I wanted to talk about a
Yeah.
little bit is when you have performance
Mhm.
performance metrics or
Mhm.
SLAs built into your contract that your
Mhm.
customer is then purchasing from you, whatever solution it might
Mhm.
be, there might be times where while you say you're going to be up 99%
Mhm.
of the time and then there's penalties, if you're
Mhm.
not, and the customers kind of call you on that
Mhm.
legally and from a business term standpoint, it might be enough to like put you out of business. What happens if you can't adhere to what you've said you will be able to do? Right. Like that could actually happen where the penalties are so great that it puts the company at risk for not having adhered to it.
Right. And so the job of a product manager or a product owner is to model out that risk. So right, you say, hey, you know what, we're up 99.99% uptime. Great. That's awesome. Right. But you have to do the modeling and say, okay, worst case scenario, we're down. Here are the penalties. Can we absorb that?
Mhm.
Right. And I would propose the product manager needs to bring up that topic, but the decision makers isn't the product manager. It's the executive leadership team of that organization would have to make that choice, or whoever is the operating financial authority at your level. Because
Right.
I don't think Google's going to be making that the CEO of Google's make that decision. They might drive that down a little bit lower to like
But
a
it does
division.
bring up kind of an interesting scenario that I remember Luke Homan talking to
Mhm.
us about, where he was working for one organization where the
Mhm.
licensing agreement said, in effect, and I'm
Mhm.
paraphrasing,
Mhm.
will support every version of iOS right from the beginning.
Mhm.
Right. And they didn't write it in a way that allowed them contractually to stop
Mhm.
supporting super old and, in fact,
Mhm.
eventually completely unsupported versions of the OS. So they had to renegotiate the contract with their
Mhm.
existing customers to say, look, if we don't renegotiate this term and we're required to support, versions of an OS that might be 8 or 10 years old, we can't do it. It's an existential risk for our company. Like it's so difficult that we would probably go out of business if we had to do it. So they actually renegotiate every one of their contracts in order to have a more reasonable backward compatibility clause, because they hadn't thought about it when they first built it.
Yeah, and people say, oh, well, you can't renegotiate a contract. Actually, you can. That's a good example. That's not the only example I've heard of renegotiating a contract. I've also heard of another scenario where there was an error on the fees, huge fees, right? Someone put 3 too many zeros in there, and people went back and said, hey, we made a mistake. We didn't review this. And if we agree to this, it's existential. We go out of business, and we're coming to you. We want to support you. We're not saying we don't want to support the product. We just made a mistake, and a lot of the people are like, yeah, no problem. Yep. We don't want you to go out of business, right? And so they fix that error, and so you can renegotiate these things. I mean, then you're talking. I mean, but you got to get the lawyers and the product managers and renegotiate.
Well, if the product manager notices it, right? I mean, as boring as it may sound, it's actually remarkably interesting to read through a contract on both sides and just think about, like, what kind of impact does this have on your ability for future choices or revenue choices that you might want to make. Again, it's that systems thinking piece where it impacts in surprising ways. So
yeah, and that's kind of summarized here. I mean, there's 3 main points. One is all the components of the business model of a software-enabled solution are system. You cannot look at these in isolation, right? And changes made in one area of a software-enabled solution are linked to one or more areas. And so changing your solution could have impact on your customer license or your pricing. As a product manager, the second point is you must read the licenses for any technology you in-license. So any component, even something simple like Java library, right? Or some type of framework that's fundamental, read it, right? Make sure you've read it and like, okay, I understand what this is.
Yeah.
Most importantly, you need to understand those implications to your business model. A lot of components, you just buy them and you have perpetual license, great. And then finally, I would say it's your responsibility to create and update the customer license as your solution evolves. And review your in-license technology as the solution evolves. Every 6 months or so is what we recommend. Okay.
So there's one more question that I think is better answered in one of our pre-recorded webinars, but Brijesh asks about the product manager's ability to affect things like pricing. In this case, he was talking about user pricing and how that ends up being impacted by procurement and where it's being sold from and bulk kind of buying agreements. And so this is kind of, I think, gets into the pricing webinar that Jason ran. And so if you want to, I'll put the link into chat. But go ahead and listen to that. But yeah, I mean, it's a combination of what's the value exchange model, what's the actual price, and then what are the pricing policies that allow for changes in that to happen. So when you talk about like bulk pricing and how that gets implemented through this system, it's a combination of the value exchange model being defined, the price being defined, and then policies that impact the ability for people to have flexibility on what price is paid for volume deals, for example.
Yeah, I think that's Jason has 3 categories of different types of discount policies. One is buyer identification, and another one is timing when you buy allows you to get a discount. All right, so we'll put a plug in for that one. I think if you want to advance the slide, Carlton, there's a couple other things I wanted to. I think that's which you want to go near the end where we talk about what's coming up.
Yeah, I mean, we've got just a couple minutes left, so we should probably get close to wrapping.
Yeah.
So okay, so what's next? If you want to flip to the next slide, I'm curious for those who are here, what do you wish we would go deeper on, or what else do you want to know? The profit stream canvas is a don't be restricted to what you see here, but in case you wanted to be refreshed on some of the things that we could potentially dive into. If you could make a webinar request or a topic request, throw it into chat if you have an idea about what you'd like to see. And then if you want to, while people are typing that in, if you want to advance one more here. So the other things that can come next would be the Profit Streams book is very close to being done. In fact, I have a pre-release actual physical thing that looks really fantastic. So we're getting very close to this being available. So if you go to theprofitstreams.com, you'll see that. We also teach this course. It's a 2-day class. We had fantastic feedback on this so far. So while it's one of our newer courses, it's available. And if you want to talk to us about delivering it as a private course, we are updating our public course offerings as well, but definitely as a private course, this is fantastic too. So those are 2 things there. And that, I think that's probably it. And look at that, 2 minutes ahead.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate the folks that made it all the way to the end. If you have questions on this, please send them to myself or Laura. Join our Profit Streams community. We are trying to bring people together. We really want to learn and exchange more, and stay in touch, right, Laura?
Yep, stay in touch and stay tuned for more. We'll be sending out the link to the recording and then updates about future webinars.
Okay.
So thanks, everyone. And Carlton, thank you so much. This was really great.
Cool. Great.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.